Guinness 2023 Six Nations is all wrapped up, and it was a Grand Slam winning weekend in Dublin. Ireland prevailed over a 14-man England to continue the St Patrick's Day celebrations. And joining me and the full house of columnists today, we have the perfect special guest in one of the greats of Irish rugby, Willie John McBride. Congratulations to Ireland. They sealed the Grand Slam. You've got to say they deserved it, whether you think it was a red card at the weekend or not. Not that that may have made a difference. We're going to look back at the weekend and the tournament as a whole today. Full house of columnists for the moment. Brendan's got a dash in about 20 minutes, as well as one of the all-time greats of Irish and British and Irish Lion rugby, Willie John McBride. How are you, Willie John?
I'm very good. Very good week passed, so I'm happy.
Has the party stopped yet? Where were you at the weekend? Were you at home or were you in Dublin?
I was home by the fire watching a TV.
Look, we'll get to the Irish Grand Slam in a minute. I just want to look at the game first. And, well, Willie John, let's hear your thoughts on the game first of all, and then we'll open the can of worms that is the red card.
Well, it was obviously going to be, there was a lot of talk about the weekend, obviously. It put a lot of pressure on both teams, but particularly on Ireland. Because England the week before, it was just a nonsense what happened against France. And that certainly was never going to happen again. Because if you look at the 15 players they put in the field, there was a lot of ability in that team. And they were certainly going to be better. Ireland were obviously very nervous. It was a tough game. But the one thing that pleased me more than anything was, even though it was tough and they were struggling, they never lost concentration and they never panicked. And that has been a sort of a virtue of theirs all year, really. When things were going a bit awry, they settled down and they caught hold of the game again, and they did exactly the same Saturday. So I was very pleased with that.
That's been a sort of feature of the tournament, hasn't it? Because you were obviously Ireland versus France was the game of the tournament by most people's accounts, and obviously you're under the cosh at some point there. Same thing against Italy, same thing against England, but that's part of the winning mentality, isn't it? To be able to, when you're under the cosh, put it out the bag. That's
right. Andy Farrell has obviously got this team together, and they're a skillful lot too, the Irish team. And he's got them together, and he's made them believe in themselves, which is very good.
The red card. Let's jump straight into it. I'm going to go around the circle. Willie John, I'll start with you. Was it a red card or not?
Well, I played for 14 years. I know there were no cards in my day, but. When I looked at that, and particularly when I looked at it in slow motion, it certainly was a dangerous act that he did with his elbow and his shoulder. But, I think when one looks at it, Ireland lost a player in the middle of it all. And I think it was only fair that England lost a player who committed the crime, if you want to put it that way. So I have no problem with that. And obviously, they gave it a good, thorough sort of research in playback, and there was a number of people who made up their mind on the red card. So I think let's get rid of it. It's done. And I hate to see red cards because it does spoil a game, and England had to sort of reorganize, and they did that very well.
I think before I come to you, Brendan, one thing I just want to say is obviously the impact of the red card has maybe been blown out of proportion. The reality is England was still losing. And teams are often, well, Brendan, maybe you agree with me, teams are often galvanised by going down to 14 men.
Yeah, and in fact,
were last year at Twickenham.
I thought England were galvanised. And the first thing to say is, in my opinion, it didn't affect the result of the match in any way. This was an outstanding Ireland team, possibly the best I've ever seen. It was an outstanding Grand Slam. Any Grand Slam, when you beat that France side, is just one of the best you can imagine. So, and Ireland deserve everything they've got. The discipline was superb. However, I do not think that was a red card. That was a knock-on by Ireland. The only reason Keenan was running onto it was to stop England playing advantage. He was offside. If you look at it, he was actually offside, but he was trying to stop England, deny them the opportunity of playing advantage. Stewart is thinking, what is going on here? And he's got this bloke hurtling at him, and we don't know if he's trying to kick the ball, dive on the ball, or at the last minute, he goes to grab the ball. He's in no position to set himself to make a tackle. And if he did, he'd probably tackle a bloke without the ball and get into trouble for that. What he tried to do was brace, and he sort of half braced and half tried to get out of the way. But this is all happening in a flash. If you look at it, it's so quick. And I hate these slow motions. They're bollocks. Rugby is not played in slow motion. It should not be judged in slow motion. And I think that was an incredibly harsh red card. When you see some of the things that people get away with and don't even get talked to, for that to be a red card in front of a full house in Dublin, and to, how long was there left? Over a half, wasn't it? I mean, it just doesn't sit with me at all well, that decision.
Chris?
Well, I've seen England play almost complete Six Nations championships in slow motion, just to pick you up on that. So rugby can be played in slow motion. I think it's a very difficult one with the laws as they stand. I think it was a soft dismissal, metaphorically speaking, a very soft dismissal. But it was a hard incident, and it's put a guy off the field. He did turn into it. He sort of semi-jumped into it, albeit I completely take the split-second nature of the event, and therefore large parts of Brendan's argument. He sort of jumped into it. He did sort of lead with his elbow, but as you say, the time involved was tiny. I think the referee and all referees at the moment are pretty much bound by law and regulation. There's virtually no interpretation open to them. If there's force to the head, then it's pretty much a one-way street in terms of the decision making. I don't think anyone would have lost any sleep if he'd been given a yellow card under normal circumstances. Some people are arguing that it wasn't even a penalty. It's a very, very difficult subject, that one. But I do think that under the laws as they stand, Jacko Piper, who is not my favourite referee by a very long chalk, but I don't think he had far to go on it. He had no elbow room, so to speak.
Nick, do you agree?
Yeah, I do. Broadly speaking, I think that there's a natural justice in things very often, and that there wasn't a natural justice in the decision. I don't think it made any difference to the result. I think Piper has said subsequently that if he hadn't given a red, that he would probably be off the international panel. I think that makes it pretty difficult for referees. We'd all like them to be able to use, I guess, what you'd call a common sense decision in circumstances like that. I think that was probably taken away from him to a degree. And I think that the idea of judging harshly on millisecond reactions when there is no intended damage or danger, I think is unfortunate. And I think that this idea that's been mooted of initially him being given a yellow, let's say, or initially being given a red, let's say, rather than a yellow, but that it is then reviewed in greater detail away from the the obvious pressure of the crowd and the moment and so on, and that there's a 10-minute period in which to do that. And then if it's deemed to be that it was a red card, he stays off. And if it's deemed to be that there were mitigating circumstances, he comes back on. Yeah. So it means more bureaucracy, or more TV match officials and so on and so forth examining it. But I suppose we are looking at the gold standard tournament in the world, and therefore those resources, if you're going to go to TMOs and the like, those resources should be available.
Willie John, would Colin Meads ever have committed such a foul deed as Freddie Stewart did on Saturday?
Well, they were different days altogether. We all had to look after ourselves in those days, and he had his own way of looking after himself. We all had to cope with that. I must admit, I was a perpetrator on one occasion when I put him down in Dublin. I put him on his backside. And, I should have got a card if there were cards in those days. We all looked after ourselves and we got on with it.
Yeah.
That was unprovoked, I'm assuming, Willie John. Was that getting your retaliation in early or what?
Well. Yeah, they were different days, just literally different days.
I do hate this thing, though, that every time you get an incident, not just this incident, any incident, all the pundits say you have to look at it in real time, and nobody ever looks at it in real time. Every single picture of it is in this super slow-mo that the French art directors love particularly. And it's like thousandths of a second, and it just doesn't in any way convey what the impact and initial impact of that incident was. And it sort of plays with your mind seeing all this super slow motion.
And don't underestimate the influence of the crowd as well. Like a Dublin crowd seeing the impact in slow motion, and all of a sudden you hear this echo in the stadium with the crowd.
Yeah,
going, oh my
well,
God,
that's the same everywhere, of course. Yes.
Yeah, it is.
My attitude's a little bit different in that, you know, Ireland out of the incident, Ireland lost a player for the rest of the game. So therefore, why should the perpetrator be off the field as well?
Well, they lost a player, but he was replaced, whereas England lost a player, you know, permanently. I guess that's the difference.
Yeah. But, you know, that's the world we live in today. You just got to be careful. Like, let's be honest, on Saturday, I'm not the greatest lover of referees, but there were a number of incidents. For instance, Johnny Saxon was bumped from behind totally unnecessarily, which could have damaged his neck. There was somebody else who was actually spear tackled onto the ground, and there was very little done about those, you know. So
and Lewis Ludlam took a crack to the head at one of the wipeouts, cleanouts, right in front of Jacko Piper, and he didn't even bat an eyelid.
Yeah, I guess the one of the issues is that if they're in it all the time, every second or every minute of the game, we haven't got much of a game.
Yeah.
I think at some point we will have a referee back on the Rugby Paper Podcast, because it's been a while and it might be time to rediscuss the ever-changing laws, because I think the question of laws versus justice or versus common sense is one of you mentioned, I can't remember who now, comes into it. But I think let's put it to bed, because like a few of us have said, it didn't really affect the result. Speaking of the result, Willie John, I just want to ask, were you ever worried on Saturday afternoon? Were you ever worried that the boys wouldn't get it done?
well, I was a bit worried in the first sort of 15, 20 minutes, half hour, in that they were nerves, they were dropping ball, they were doing all sorts of things that they haven't done all year. And I think that England got to the point where they were able to slow the ball down, because Ireland played their game with fast ball from breakdown situations, and England had mastered that quite well. But after half an hour, I thought, you know, there was no panic. They were just playing the game, and that things would come together. And that's really what happened. And I think that's where Johnny Saxon, as captain, comes into this. He's one of those players who just sums up the situation and gets hold of the game again and got everybody back on track.
Strength in depth as well, isn't it? I mean, I can't think of a game, the Six Nations, where the Ireland bench, for example, hasn't made a massive impact. I think you've closed out every game really, really well. Yes,
I agree. But that's where Andy Farrell is good, that he comes in, and, you know, he's been very lucky, and Ireland have been very lucky in that we've got some depth now, which is good. Yeah,
exactly. Brendan, just while we've got you, I want to get your thoughts on England. Farrell played well, maybe his best game of the tournament, which was a positive. Marcus Smith not coming off the bench is an interesting one. Positives and negatives from the performance.
The positive was an unrecognisable pack that dogged it out, fought it like you'd want an England pack to play against Ireland in Dublin. That was a proper shift from the entire team. It wasn't perfect by any stretch, but, you know, people like Sinclair really rolled his sleeves up. I thought Jack Willis was terrific. I thought David Ribbons had a very good physical match. And that was, for me, was the basis of a much improved England performance. Owen Farrell does, when you've got a pack that is at the very least 50-50 and perhaps shading it on occasions, Farrell can run a game pretty well. And I thought he did it pretty well. Having said that, England backs didn't actually produce that much. I mean, Anthony Watson looked pretty lively when he took some loose ball, but he wasn't actually fed with an awful lot of possession. But no, I thought it was much improved. It had to be. It was dire against France. You're going to play the number one team chasing a Grand Slam in Dublin. You had to front up. And they did front up. So there's a bit to work there for Steve Borthwick.
The game in France was obviously a big blemish. Do you think that this actually represents a step forward, or do you think it was the inevitable only step, given that they had hit rock bottom?
I think it was inevitable only step. But I think this is probably the true representation of where England are under Steve Borthwick. Now, they had won 2 of the previous 3 matches. They weren't an absolute basket case, but they were nowhere near performing as well as they should. They absolutely lost the plot against an outstanding France side, and they had to front up, and they did. There's some stuff to work with there, but there's a long way to go with England. I'll leave you guys to discuss it later, but whether there's time to get this right before the World Cup is a big debating point. They've got a fairly decent draw in the World Cup, but there's a long way to go.
Yeah, well, I think most have ruled out England as World Cup contenders. Obviously, Andy Robertson said he disagreed with that last week. I think Clive Woodward had said he still believed England will get to the semis, but I can't see them, winning that final, whichever of the top 5 it's against. Now, Brendan, you did mention in the conversation this Ireland side for the greatest Ireland team ever. Willie John, for you, you're one of the best people in the world to ask this question. What do they have to achieve from now to? Has that conversation started already for you?
Well, I think that, they obviously have this in their minds. There's no question about it. But the one thing that has stuck in my mind this year is that their level of fitness and preparation has been absolutely superb. And they've got to keep that sort of preparation going now for the next 2 or 3 months until the World Cup. And I've no doubt about it that Andy Farrell mentally will be fit to prepare them for what's ahead of it. But again, it's rugby football we're talking about. So many things can happen when you saw what happened England against France, where everything ran for France. Every little bounce of the ball, everything that happened that day ran for France, and that can happen in the game. So, and the World Cup is a tough scene because you've got to play so many games in such a short period of time. So, but I'd say that they are now, Andy Farrell is now preparing them to prepare and keep their level of concentration from now until the World Cup.
Would you brand yourselves favourites for the World Cup at this stage?
No way. No way. The World Cup is a different scene, and it certainly is very much match per match. There's no question about that.
Who are favourites in your mind?
Obviously, I'd say that they'll obviously be in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Ollie, can I leave you with 2 stats just before I have to fly?
Yeah, absolutely.
This Ireland team, they had not a single yellow card in 5 full-blooded Six Nations Test matches. I mean, how good is that? How disciplined is that? And I think that comes from Willie John's point of supreme fitness. When you're that fit, you can think your way through. You don't have to go over the top. You've got that sort of that extra gear to go all the time. And they conceded just 6 tries. So this is a fabulous attacking machine, the Ireland rugby team. They got threats everywhere, but it all starts with defence, or a lot of it starts with defence. You just don't score very easily against Ireland, and if you can't score, you can't win, can you? If they're not giving penalties away, they're not giving cards away. If you're not conceding tries, they're a very, very difficult team to beat.
I'd just like to add to that, actually. 6 tries this year. They've conceded 10 tries in this year's Six Nations and last year's Six Nations combined, whereas England on their own conceded 18 just this year.
Yeah.
So it goes to show, well, how far off the pace England are defensively and how good Ireland are defensively. You're absolutely right. Brendan, I'm guessing you got to shoot now, yeah?
Got to go, guys. Wonderful talking. Willie John, many congratulations. You must be very proud of that team.
Yeah, it's nice. It's good for Irish rugby, yeah.
Good on you.
Bye.
Good.
So Willie, we can talk about the Grand Slam itself now, and obviously we've seen, Willie John, where does this rank in terms of the most emphatic Grand Slams?
Where does it rank, sorry?
In terms of like the most emphatic Grand Slams, you won every game by over 10 points, for example.
Yes, I think that this is the best I've seen, really, because, all the pressure was on them. And, whether we like it or not, in the days gone by, there was a number of teams like Italy. Italy are a difficult team to beat now. Every game is a difficult game, and there's not a lot in it. And this is why I think it was the most emphatic one, is that Ireland took on each one and they won it pretty well emphatically. But and they scored tries. They scored good tries, which was good. But let's face it, on Saturday in a game where they weren't as good as they had been in the past, they still scored 4 tries, which was very good. Yeah. And I think that it's the best certainly I've seen.
I mean, they scored. The thing about the game on Saturday was that England managed to turn it into a little bit of a stalemate. They'd gone in to stop Ireland playing, I think, and they'd managed to do it for a while. But in the final quarter, Ireland just, found another gear or another couple of gears. And what's so impressive about them, I mean, some of the analysis that I've seen of them is that, and it shows, is that they've got decoy runners almost everywhere on every move. And so actually you cut off one artery and the other one goes into overdrive. They are a very, very fine side. And I don't see this being another, as Willie John has said, I think that they're very strong contenders. The World Cup is a different beast. But
especially in there after the draw.
with what they did in New Zealand as well last summer, they're really formidable, and they'll take some stopping.
I think Nick makes a couple of good points there. To borrow an old joke, England may not be any good, but at least they turned up, and they turned up on Saturday, and the way they turned up, it was a little bit like the old equivalent back in Willie John's days. It's almost as though he thought, this lot, if we get this wrong today, this lot could give us a hiding. So we're going to fire it up a little bit and see how much they like it. And that would have taken its own particular form in Willie John's time. And the form it takes in today's rugby is really getting stuck in at the breakdown. And they were very, very physical at the breakdown. They do have players to do it. Your Ludlams, Jack Willis, Ellis Genge, Itoje, and it was an attitudinal thing. The difference in attitude and just guts and venom and all those rugby abstractions that Willie John would have recognised back in the day between the French performance and Saturday's performance was huge. Where Ireland have improved massively, it seems to me, they were always vulnerable in the end, no matter how well they've been playing in recent years. They were always vulnerable to being beaten up by a bigger pack of forwards and struggling over the 80 against a very physical opposing 8. And they're not intimidated now, and they're not dominated. They have people like Andrew Porter. I mean, Ty Furlong had about the worst game I've ever seen him play, actually, on Saturday. But Andrew Porter has been terrific. They've got this bloke, Sheehan, who's a big guy. They've got a bunch of second rows now. 4 second rows. I mean, Burns not been around. Ryan is back to his very best, I think, or something approaching his very best. Henderson missed Saturday, who's a very, very tough, aggressive forward. And then they've got this kid Baird. I mean, that's a bank of second row forwards, the like of which I can't imagine Ireland have ever had in terms of numbers of quality second rows. I don't know what Willie John thinks about that. I don't know who was challenging him for his place back in the day. But that's something that you can build on and live off in a tough game. They're not going to be intimidated, I don't think, with forwards like that in the type 5. I don't think they'll be intimidated at all. And that's a big difference, I think, for Ireland.
I don't think that they were ever going to be intimidated by that England pack. And one of the things that I'm not all that keen on about the narrative following this game is, brave England, or, England, really showed their teeth and so on. Look, I think that at international level, that sort of level of commitment and aggression should be a given. I don't think it's something that England should find, once every 5 games or whatever. They need a far higher standard. They need to hold themselves to a far higher standard. And they could start off by having a look at Ireland's standards.
I don't disagree with that, Nick, but they didn't bring that level of commitment to certain games, did they? I mean, they did not operate at that temperature at the breakdown and in the collision areas. They were cool to stone cold in a couple of games in this Six Nations, and I agree with you. I don't think that's acceptable. Anywhere near acceptable. Kyle Sinker's a classic, isn't he? I mean, there are games when he doesn't turn up at all.
Yeah.
On Saturday, he was a different kettle of fish. And it drives me mad because he's a gifted forward. He just needs to rocket up his rear end.
Yeah, but let's look at it. This is the 3rd finish in the lower half of the table, And, you know, you look at the legacy, you know, from the 2019 World Cup and all the, you know, the triumphal march after the New Zealand game and what was being said about England then. And you look at where England are now, and this is a disaster, really is. And, you know, I mean, it's been a downward trajectory all the bloody way. And, you know, Eddie Jones, look, I mean, you know, the idea when he said 4 years kicking stones down the road, that was exactly the wrong message to send. The message to send then should have been, here, we've got to get back. We've got to look at the young players coming through, and we've got to give people the opportunity to build into a new side, which has got some real teeth. And it didn't happen. And now Borthwick, I mean, I don't think Jones would have done any better than Borthwick has. And, you know, Borthwick's got a real job on his hands. And, you know, England expects and England demands all the time. You know, we keep on talking about the number of players we've got and so on and so forth, or had. Don't know how many we got now, but, you know, and there is a real urgency to get this side up and firing for this World Cup. They've actually got such a favourable draw that if they don't get to a semi-final, they should, you know, that would be another failure. You know, I mean, it's time that England started to, you know, to look at this less as a cyclical thing where, you know, we go up and we go down and so on and so forth, and recognise that actually there are countries that are now beginning to hit an upward trajectory most of the time, and we're not one of them.
It was very interesting, actually, that in the under-20s game yesterday, down in Cork, England went down there with a big pack of forwards, including Ollie Chesham's brother in the second row, who played very well and lost his rag at the end because he was frustrated. But Ireland played in pretty much precisely the same way as the Test side, and they were very organised, but also really driven around the breakdown, because they knew full well against a bigger pack of forwards that they might struggle at set piece, which they did, particularly at line-out time. But they were very hungry around that ball and very organised in their hunger. And that's, I mean, it's a little bit scary to think how well equipped Ireland are with players at the moment. I mean, they've got a terrific number 8, a terrific 7, terrific 9 and 10s coming through from that under-20 side. Really very good. You can see it a mile off. So I think Ireland are very well set, actually.
They've got a great. They've got a
better
great
set than England, I would say.
They've got a great schools system, a highly competitive schools system, and the provincial system, and so on and so forth. The Irish have got their ducks in a row. There's no question about that. All the way along the line.
Yeah.
All the way along the line.
I think I've got to bring in the question here of, the Irish habit, Willie John, of peaking too early. And the way we're talking, it's almost as if Ireland aren't peaking, they're just permanently building. And maybe that's one of the reasons, I certainly don't believe they're peaking too early, and that's one of the reasons. Another one being that, unlike France, for example, they're not built on 3 or 4 match winners. And if they don't show up, they don't put in much of a performance. We speak about all their injuries and the players that come in.
Yeah, they're never happy with their performance. They always want to take another step all the time, and that's very good. That's very healthy. The one thing, just listening to the game, England are kicking the ball too much. I hate kicking in the game. There's toing and throwing, because Ireland handled. I think we dropped one ball, which was unusual, really. But this high kicking all the time, it's getting nowhere. And I still go back to the old days, way back. I remember in '71 when we rarely, if ever, beat the All Blacks. I don't think we had beaten them at that time, at any stage. And Carvin James said, why does everybody, when they get the ball playing against the All Blacks, they kick it? He said, we will not kick it in 1971. We will run at them. And, Saturday, I felt that England sort of lost their game altogether when they started this kicking back and forward. Why didn't they develop the game that they could use the ball rather than kick it away?
Hmm. Well, I think that was one of the things, is that they geared their game towards a defensive game. I don't think that there's any question about that, and towards disrupting Ireland. And the attacking side of their game really didn't, apart from a driving maul, where which they executed well. for the try, they didn't really threaten the Irish line.
Yeah.
There was very little that was joined up in attack at all by England, and that's another story.
Yeah.
It's quite a static game, and it comes from a static thought. I mean, almost a stasis in imagination. There ain't much going on in that England side in terms of attack. And it's not as simple as just saying to Marcus Smith, "You're the whiz kid, you come in and transform everything." It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that.
They've got this negative thing built into their brain.
Yeah.
And, it takes time to get that out of it again.
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
they've got the players.
Chris, can we put a positive spin on that in international rugby in general, and to say that a good set piece, a strong kicking game, or a kicking game of sorts, whether it's strong or just a kicking game, is no longer enough? Because I think you could say 5 years ago, it wasn't necessarily enough to beat the great All Black side, for example, but it was certainly, an asset that it no longer is, I would say. I think it's a bare minimum, but you have to build on that to be a contender.
Yeah, I agree with that. I sort of tried to make the point in a column in last Sunday's paper that yes, you need the fundamentals. Your set piece has got to be right. Your disciplines have to be right. Your ball protection has to be at a high level. All those things, all the things that have made rugby tick down through the ages. But another thing that has always made the great side tick, and this is nothing new actually, is to have players who react very quickly when the game goes messy. It's a messy old game, isn't it? I mean, it's it was messy on Saturday because you could see that by the way that the Irish, who were pretty much error free all the way through the tournament, were making very uncharacteristic mistakes. There was a lot of pressure on the game for them, as Willie John said right at the start. There was more pressure on them than there was on England. That's for sure. I mean, they had a big prize on the end of that. And it did show with some of the mistakes they made. But when you have people who can react, Matt Hansen's a classic example of a bloke who just intervenes when things are turning to crap. He is a tidier up. He is an influencer. Not all the time. He's a right wing. He can't do it all game, but he does it in the right places. I thought Bundy Aki, who I thought was a rather limited player for many years, albeit an effective one, I thought he was magnificent on Saturday. Absolutely magnificent, not just in terms of his aggression, but in terms of making the right decisions off scruffy ball, doing the right things at the right time. Van der Fleer is a classic example of it as well. James Ryan is a classic example. I mean, this is what you need. You need to be able to react. Your rugby instincts have to be at a really high level. And it seems to me that quite a lot of the England players down the years have had the rugby instincts drilled out of them, not enhanced. They've become mechanized. And that's not the way at the very, very top level. That's not the way you're going to win anything.
I think that, the kicking game is an interesting one because the current world champions are still a team that kick the ball a lot, but their kick chase is a real weapon for them, and they play off it almost. And so I think one of the beauties of the game is that there are always different ways to skin the cat in terms of attacking play. Ireland's try came from, or one of Ireland's tries came from a beautiful cross kick by Johnny Sexton. So it's as always, I think it's about mixing up your game, and it's about judgment. And in terms of judgment and generalship, Ireland had a master on the field, and have had. I mean, at the age of 37, for him to still be producing in the way he is, with that level of ability and consistency, is remarkable.
That's because he never plays. Willie John plays more often than Johnny Sexton.
Yeah, he wrapped in cotton wool a fair amount of the time. That's for sure.
I want to talk about England a little bit, officially now. And Nick, I want to come back to something that you said about the trajectory of England since 2019. And I agree with you, it has been something of a disaster. The one thing that's irked me slightly about Steve Borthwick, this Six Nations, is all this talk. Remember when he said that he inherited a team that wasn't good at anything?
Yeah.
And he's
He was
kind
right.
of, he was right, but he's kind of hammered home that point to the point of exhaustion and meaninglessness. And
I think that what's happened is that he said it. He might have said it once or twice, but we've latched onto it. That's for sure.
But maybe, do you not think it's a slightly toxic mentality to inherit in terms of saying that to yourself or to your squad rather, or publicly? And so your squad obviously hears and sees it. We've got a squad that's not good at anything. What does that say for a team's confidence? We spoke about an England team that's playing with a negative mindset. Willie John said it. How does that fuel that?
Yeah, I understand your point. I mean, it's perhaps not great, but it's what a coach who is embattled, if you like, from the get-go, which he is. He can always say, we've made improvements from rock bottom. So that's where I think it's coming from. It's a bit of psychology in that sense. But he's also said that he wants England to play, with real pace, a very, very fast attacking game. Well, you're not going to get that with Owen Farrell. He's a very good player in all sorts of regards. But, when it comes to playing that sort of fast, wide-ranging game, he's probably not your man. So England, again, we finish a Six Nations with actually, I'm not sure that any decisions have really been made in the key areas. They're in a bit of a catch-22.
But if you think back, let's say to the early 2000s, Nick, 2001, 2002, when England were playing a quicker game than anyone, probably, they were going along at 6 or 7 tries a game in those Six Nations championships. Mm. And they had Johnny Wilkinson at 10. Mm. Now, Johnny Wilkinson was many things, but he wasn't Usain Bolt. And he wasn't a particularly expansive fly half in his whole vision of the game. There were people around him who made massive amounts out of his expertise and the security he provided and all those kinds of things. So that's fine. So it's a long-winded way of saying it doesn't all come down on Farrell. I mean, if Farrell hadn't been on the field, England would have lost by more on Saturday.
No, listen, you're right. It doesn't all come down on Farrell. And when he plays fly half, we've said it before on the podcast, when he plays fly half for Saracens, he plays in a different way. And they do move the ball. I've never been one of those people who thought that Wilkinson was a really limited 10. I think he had a lot more to his game, a hell of a lot more to his game than a lot of people give him credit for. In terms of moving the ball, his passing was superb. I think he's a very, very, very accomplished 10, and we haven't really had anything like him since. So,
what's Steve Borthwick saying in his Six Nations debrief then? I think it's on Wednesday. It's Monday at the time of recording, Chris. What's he going to say?
Well, I mean, this goes back to the quote that you rightly attributed to him a few minutes ago. That a side that's not very good at anything. That's another way. That's another way of saying we're going back to basics, basically. And back to basics is the kind of message that a coach gives out when he wants to buy himself some time. He knows he's in a little bit of a pickle in certain positions. He knows things aren't very on a particularly even keel. He knows he's got a hell of a lot of work to do in World Cup year. So thanks a bunch. That's a pretty tough gig. Now, as Wilkinson himself said after the French game, he was in the side that was the previous worst performance, or one of the worst performances in an England shirt, which was down in South Africa in the summer of 2007. 4 months later, 5 months later, whatever it is, England are in a World Cup final. So these things can happen. But of course, the difference was that the side that played against France was a first pick England side, whereas the side that played against the Box in Bloemfontein was a third choice side at best. So there are massive differences. What Borthwick cannot say is we haven't got a Scooby's chance. of winning the World Cup or even having a major impact on its destination. We're really up against it here. We've got massive amounts of work to do with no games left, apart from some World Cup warm-ups, which amount to nothing whatsoever. So I think if Steve was being honest, which he can't afford to be because he'll be absolutely slaughtered for being so negative, he would say, forget the thing. Please don't judge us on what's about to happen in the World Cup, for which we are in no way prepared.
Please don't judge us on the World Cup.
Please don't judge us on the World Cup. It's the anti-Clive Woodward message. But of course, Clive Woodward always said, judge us on the World Cup. But he very cleverly said, what he didn't say was which World Cup he was on about. So he said it before the 99 World Cup and then won the thing in 2003. So I don't envy Steve Borthwick's position. He's a little bit like Jacko Piper. He has no elbow room in what he can say, just as Piper had no elbow room in what he did on Saturday with Freddie Stewart. If he was honest, he'd say, "Forget the World Cup. We're just gonna." Obviously, we're going to try. Obviously, we're going to put our best foot forward, but we're not really in a position to have a major impact on that tournament. Not a big impact, and we just need to rebuild. We need to get our ducks in a row, and it's going to take time. He's not in a position to be able to say that, so he'll come out with some form of words that Steve, who's a bright bloke, will consider would be acceptable to the England supporters and the press and everyone else that holds him to account on this stuff. But he must know how far England are off there.
But we know that he will be judged on, including the warm-up games. He will be judged on every single game that there is from now until England go out of the World Cup or win it, which, as you say, is very unlikely. But they are going to have a say in the World Cup, I think, because they're likely, unless they lose to Argentina, which is not beyond the bounds of possibility at all.
No, I agree.
But if they do play and improve, they're on the easier side of the draw, and it's quite possible that England will get to a semi-final.
Yeah.
If they were on the other half of the draw, there wouldn't be a chance, or much of it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
So,
I mean, it'll be Wales in the quarterfinal, wouldn't it?
So, well, it might be. There is a, England are going to, they are going to be a presence at the World Cup. What sort of presence is up to them?
Yeah. Let's move on. I think the bottom line is that in these 5 games, England haven't made the positive steps that you would have hoped for when we previewed the tournament 8 weeks ago. And you're right, they are running out of chances, but a semi-final is definitely not beyond the realms of possibility either. Willie John, I think it's time we do your random rugby 15. It's just 15 quick-fire questions about you and your rugby career, if you're happy to do that.
Yeah, it seems a long time ago.
All right, well, whatever you can remember. So,
Willie John, can I tell you at this point that one of your successors as Lions manager, Andy Irvine, was asked a series of questions about his own career in a quiz on the 2013 Lions tour of Australia, and he got them all wrong.
Oh, oh dear.
Willie
But
John,
he was in drink.
Okay, let's get going. Nickname.
Well, I never really had a nickname other than Willie John.
Yeah.
Some called me Willie, some called me Willie John. But I should say that my name is not Willie John. My name is Willie James. So
Yeah.
Willie John was my nickname. It seemed to sort of rhyme, and it seemed to catch on, and it sort of went on for years and years.
Did you change your name because you were trying to avoid the police?
Yeah. It was other people that changed my name, not me.
Best rugby memory.
Best rugby. Well, I've thought a bit about that. Everybody today talks about their Everest, and my Everest was winning in '74 in South Africa, winning a Test series. because it had never been done before, not even by the All Blacks. So that obviously, and to be captain of an unbeaten side in 22 games, that really was my best memory. I'll never forget it. I'll never, ever forget it. I had a bunch of the greatest men that ever played this game with me. It was tremendous.
Most embarrassing rugby memory.
Well, I can never really recall being embarrassed in any situation. You know, I've dropped the ball, I've done stupid things at times when I shouldn't have done it. But I could maybe change that by saying my most disappointment memories would have been in '72 when Scotland and Wales didn't turn up in Dublin for the Five Nations, because that particular year we'd 1 or 2 away games, which was a big thing from Ireland point of view in those days. And we had this sort of feeling that we had got a team together and that we could maybe beat Wales and Scotland in Dublin. So that was a big disappointment.
Pre-game tune. What song would you listen to before a game?
Which, sorry?
What song would you listen to before a game?
Sorry, which what?
What song?
Oh, song. No, we didn't have songs in those days.
Willie John played before music was invented.
We didn't have songs in those days. But one of the things that maybe before in the '74 tour, I think that Flower of Scotland had just been written about the year before or something. And that was the team song in '74 when we went with the Lions. And it was something that caught on and we all sang it. We even sang it on the bus going to the games. That's how relaxed we were and how confident we were. It was amazing. But no, we weren't really in the Irish team, we weren't into songs in any shape or form.
Post-game meal, what would you eat after a game?
Well, you know, the great thing, when I look back to the internationals in those days, I don't know what happens today, but in those days, after the game, we had a sort of get-together, a formal get-together with the opposite team. And you sat opposite your number in the tables. It was tremendous. And you got to know guys, which was really great. Because, and it certainly helped when you went on Lions tours, you sort of knew a lot of the guys reasonably well before you went on a Lions tour. But they were great occasions. And obviously, you know, the dining in France was always super, absolutely super. And I used to look forward to that after match in France.
Best player you've played against?
Played against? Well, I think you probably mentioned him, Meads. Meads was one of those players that sort of I admired in that, you know, he was one of those guys, no matter how hard you knocked him or pushed him or messed him around or whatever you did with him, he was back again in your face all the time. He was back again. He never sort of would withdraw. And I admired that with him. The other one that I would immediately jump to is Gareth Edwards. Gareth Edwards on both sets of playing against and playing with was, in my view, the best player that I have ever played with or played against. He was a devil because he wasn't terribly big, but he was strong and he was fast and he had tremendous vision. Gareth knew every situation on the field before he put the ball in his hands. He knew what exactly he was going to do. He was really a tremendous player. He would have been sort of my idol, if you want to put it that way.
Well, we've got that question coming up. But best player you've played with then, are you saying Gareth Edwards?
Oh, it's Gareth Edwards, yes.
Yeah.
And I say that without hesitation because I was lucky enough to be in 2 Lions tours with Edwards as scrum half and 2 winning Lions tours. And, you know, at scrum half in particular, where you take the absolute physical abuse that he took in both South Africa and New Zealand and come through and still be the winning sort of link between forwards and backs was really terrific.
Favorite player right now?
Favorite player right now? Well, I'm sticking with Ireland, obviously. There's a number of guys that I admire in the Irish team. Van der Fleer, I think, is a tremendous player. He's a tremendous player from the point of view. He's not physically big, but by Jove, he knows how to use his body. Not only that, he's got the skill and he's got the vision. And he's in everything. He literally is everything. If he's knocked over, he's up again and he's at it again. Tremendous. Ringrose is the other one that I admire greatly, who's obviously injured at the moment. But Ringrose, I think, is a superb player. And of course, the old Johnny Sexton. I remember seeing Johnny Sexton as an amateur in the club, and he was literally just out of school. And I remember saying to somebody when I was watching the game, I said, that's a guy we'll see a lot of in the future. And here we are.
Rugby idol, Gareth Edwards again?
Gareth Edwards by a long way. And obviously he was chosen as player of the century.
Favourite stadium?
Oh, it had to be the old Lansdowne Road. That's where my history is, because when you ran out onto Lansdowne Road, you felt as if you could literally put your arm out and touch the crowd. And they were there beside you all the time. It really was tremendous. The atmosphere there was really terrific.
Favorite gym exercise?
Well, I should say that when I was growing up and when I was at school, we didn't have a gym.
Yeah.
Didn't know what a gym was. So I don't know about the gym exercise, but I'll surprise you by saying this, that my first athletic efforts were actually pole vaulting.
Whoa.
Was pole vaulting. And I remember one exercise I used to do was we had a rope, and I could climb up the rope in those days. And that would have been one of my good exercises if you want to put gym exercise. But no, that's one thing that I really enjoyed was pole vaulting when I was at school. And I won the Ulster Schools Championship twice.
Wow.
Before I played rugby. But gym, no, there was no such thing as a gym in my day, you know, with all these weights and fancy machines. But I was lucky I grew up on a farm.
Okay.
And I worked hard on the farm until I was 18. Yeah.
That explains a lot, I think, about the heavy duty work of farm work.
Yeah, I remember it was peculiar because I left school, obviously, when I was 18. And I left school in the June of when I was 18. And I played for Ballymena's senior team before that year was out, 1958. So, and that really was because I was still physically able to cope with the problem of huge men around me.
Amazing. Occupation if rugby didn't exist?
Well, you know, of course, I was amateur all the way through. Yeah. I did have an occupation. I was in banking all the time. And they're the people who are paying my pension. So, you know, I don't know where I'd be if I was a professional player. But I enjoyed my banking career. I maybe didn't give it as much attention as I should have. Was being away.
At least you had somewhere in the bank to put your boot money, Willie John.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. No,
you old amateur, you.
Tell you, like some other countries, there was no boot money in Ireland. I can tell. I remember having to pay half a crown to have my jersey washed every week. They were different days.
Superstitions.
Sorry?
Superstitions. Did you have any superstitions?
Oh, no, I'm not superstitious in any shape or form. You know, one of the things that I believe today that is equally as important as physical condition is mental condition. And I think that, you know, you've got to believe that you're going to win. And it takes a lot of work to get that into somebody's head, that everything they do is positive and negative, get negativity out of the way altogether.
Rugby law you would change?
Well, you know, the game is nothing like the game I played. You know, if I could just start with the scrum was a joke. You don't have a scrum. We saw that in the last Irish game against Scotland. You don't even need a hooker anymore. And you can still do very well if you're three prop forwards. The lineouts, well, one on every 3 or 4 lineouts is crooked throw in. I would bring back rucking, probably would be the most important one, because this nonsense of holding people on the ground to get the cheap penalty, I find it absolutely amazing that they're allowed to do that. And the other thing is taking players out. I just don't understand that, taking players out without the ball. They call it clearing out or something. There's so much in the game that I just don't like anymore.
Lastly, best thing about working in rugby?
Working in rugby, it must be good. I haven't really, since I retired, I really didn't. I sort of did a bit in the club and around the place, but working in rugby is a difficult thing when you have the people who are always carping, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? It must be difficult. It's like refereeing. You're never right. And it's a big occupation is working in rugby. There's no doubt about that.
Wrapped up. Thank you for doing that, Willie John. I got to say, it's amazing to hear you talk about your incredible career. We've probably got about 20 minutes left, if that works with everyone. Does that sound okay?
Fine.
Yeah. Let's blitz through, because we've overrun a little bit, and I do want to get to a tournament review. So do have a think about your player of the tournament, moment of the tournament, and surprise of the tournament. So I'll give you a little bit of forewarning for that. But let's get to France versus Wales. And I think the only point of interest with France that I want to touch on today, and I'll come to you about this, Chris, is Fabien Galthié saying that they're the team to beat. What do you make of that? And what does that show about the mentality that he's trying to instill into his France side?
Well, he's trying to embrace expectation. Clive Woodward said exactly the same stuff in 2003. Instead of trying to create an expectation management kind of frame of mind amongst the players and amongst the supporters and what have you, he went out and said we're going in as number one in the world, and number one side in the world is meant to win a World Cup, and that's what that's what we're looking at. That's the belief that we're traveling with, etc., etc., etc. And by hook or by crook, they got there. The French are not quite number one in the world, because Ireland are number one in the world, but they're very, very close. But I think they also know that South Africa, New Zealand, conceivably Australia, I think are real dark horses for all this kind of stuff, depending on what sort of shape Eddie Jones gets them into. But there's a very, very long way in that tournament from opening game to winning the final. Massive amount. And the French have, in World Cup history, played their finals too early on occasion. They did that certainly in 99. You can argue that they did it, well, sort of in 2011. They've been a strange beast in World Cups. Frankly, they did it in 1987 as well, of course, in the first World Cup. They've been a strange beast. They haven't really all been on the same page mentally and attitudinally in the way that Galthié thinks they'll have to be if they're going to win a home World Cup. So I can quite understand him saying that. He's saying, just believe, lads, that you are as good as people say we are. Nobody thinks we're better than we do. And that's a pretty positive attitude to go into a home World Cup with.
The one thing, so if we take, the 1 and 2 ranked sides in the world as the 2 World Cup favourites, and obviously to make a case for South Africa and maybe an outside bet for New Zealand, but you take France and Ireland, and Willie John, I'm going to come to you about this. I touched upon this earlier. The one thing that concerns me slightly about France is if their 3 or 4 game changers are quiet. If Aldrit's quiet, if Unsamac's quiet, if Penno's quiet. I mean, Dupont is obviously hardly ever quiet. All of a sudden, it's not quite the same French outfit. And do you think that's where Ireland's advantage over France may lie, Willie John?
Well, the one thing that I hope they do now is forget about this number one nonsense. I wish they'd get that out of the way. We're going into the World Cup now, and there are teams like South Africa, like New Zealand, even like Australia. We don't know what they're going to be, like Ireland, like France, and there's very, very little between all these teams now. So we're going into really a new scene altogether after the Six Nations is gone. So it's a matter of these teams settling down, and whichever one can, as I go back to the old word, believe, the team that can believe mentally and drive it into their heads and take a positive attitude to this is the team that's going to come through at the end of the day. So this number one thing, it drives me mad when I hear about that, because there's so little between so many of the teams. And, you know, France always excited me. Even when I was playing against them, they always excited me. And, you know, to watch France now, when things are running for them a little bit, their support play is tremendous. But probably number one, they have pace. They have pace in their team that no other team has. They really are superb. And there's certainly this thing, number one, between them and Ireland. You know, there's nothing in it. There's absolutely nothing in it.
But do you think, you speak about belief, say, I don't know, Dupont or Aldrit and Smack or Ollie or one of those key players goes down early in the tournament and is ruled out? Do you think that the belief remains in the French team that would probably remain in the Ireland team should they lose one of their star players, so to speak?
Well, I know that they can be a bit temperamental at times, but I think that they're more mature now than they've ever been. I remember in the old days you used to say, "I wonder what team will turn up today," and they weren't good at travelling. Those days are all gone now in this professional era, and I think Galtier has really been a big success story as far as France is concerned, in that he's in charge. But it's a bit like Ireland. We have a little bit of depth now. If we lose a second row forward, it doesn't matter. We can drift one in who's equally as good. And I think that France are pretty well in that situation nowadays too.
Yeah, 100%. Well, blitzing through, let's move on to Wales. Nick, was the France game a step in the right direction? George North had his best game of the tournament. Dan Biggar too. Wales appeared to play with a bit more pace. And do you think that is something of a springboard from which Gatland can turn them into a team to beat by September, October time?
Yeah, I think that may be stretching it a bit. But what they did that England didn't do against France was that they did attack, and their attack was incisive. At times, I'm not sure about the Welsh pack. I'm not sure that it's good enough to get them into into the latter stages really of the World Cup. They finished below England in the table, and I think that's probably justified. So I think that they finished well, or they didn't finish well, but they finished better. There were signs. I think Rhys Webb has brought something to them in attack. North did have a better game. Tompkins played well too, and justified his inclusion. But it's been a pretty grim season for the Welsh. As grim as England's, if not worse.
With all the players Nick mentions, I was also really pleased to see Aaron Wainwright back in something like some shape, because at the last World Cup he was an extremely effective player, effective, and he just went off the radar. Whether Wayne Pivac simply didn't fancy him at all as a test blindside, I don't have the faintest idea. But he was pretty effective against the French. He was visible. He was involved. And the Welsh game, exactly what you say about Rhys Webb. The Welsh game has always been based around players with real rugby instinct, doing the right things in the right places, taking, getting the sort of the 50-50 stuff, the half chances and what have you, and maximising the potential of those. I think if Gatland can restore that level of just rugby instinct that made Wales so difficult to beat for so many years under Warren, I think the other thing that he will do, and he's done this before World Cups before, is he will get them super fit. They will be much fitter than they've appeared to be in recent matches and through the Pivac stewardship of the national side. Whether they go back to Poland and do all the cryotherapy stuff and whatever that they've done previously, but Warren says, I remember speaking to him a lot about this. He always said that that's one thing that is in my gift. That's one thing that is measurable, actually, fitness levels. And Wales were way off it when he took over, and they were very, very fit when they had to be in World Cups when they've gone well previously, and they've outlasted sides or they've hung around in games far longer than they look capable of doing, and that is down to the preparation that you do pre-World Cup. And Gatland is good at that stuff, really good at that stuff. So it'll be very interesting to see what they come up with. I
agree with you about Wainwright. He brought some real carrying clout to their back row. It's just this has been. There's no question this has been a very, very entertaining tournament. It's been a terrific tournament. There's been real high quality in it. It's just a pity from the Welsh point of view that when you have a player like Lewis Rees-Zammit and he really doesn't get a show at all in a tournament, it just tells you, that Wales aren't fulfilling their potential, because he is electric.
Yeah, well, they're struggling for some proper creativity in midfield, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
That's the truth of it.
They are.
Which Ireland have with Sexton. Goodness me, and Ringrose, who, as Willie John said, has come so much into his own. And whoever they put it inside centre, and they've got a choice of three now. They've got Aki, they've got McCloskey, they've got Henshaw. There's a lot going on there. The Irish do run some moves, some really interesting moves laden with dummy runners, as you said earlier, Nick, and that's not what Wales are doing at the moment. They're really struggling for an attacking game at 10, 12, and 13. So we'll see what they produce.
Let's move on to Scotland, Italy. I want to start with Italy in general. And Willie John, Italy showed promise, but the general conclusion, I think, has been that they haven't converted the attacking threat that they bring into points and results. Do you think that's a sort of manifestation of a team that over the years hasn't really learned how to win on the big stage?
Yeah, I think that's probably true, but Kieran Crowley, their coach, is a guy who has really brought them on this year, I think. And what they've got to do now is get this winning mentality into their heads, because I think on a couple of occasions they're better than the result showed. But having said that, against Scotland, Scotland are a team who deserve a lot more than what they've achieved, because they certainly believe, and yet they slip up every now and again. But they're a team also, again, who are going to cause quite a bit of surprise, I'd say, in the World Cup, because they've got a bunch of guys and a bit of depth together now, but their mental attitude is very, very good. Italy, I'm surprised. I'd say a year ago, everybody was saying, we'll beat Italy. That's not the case anymore. They're very much part of the Six Nations. And I put that into the coach.
The thing with Italy is I think they've made a massive step forward, because they are fluffing their lines. But at least they've got some lines to fluff. For years, there were no lines there. They weren't doing anything. I mean, they knew how to keep the ball. They didn't know how to put any points on the end of it. They could keep the ball for hours, but there was nothing to watch. Now they do have a threat. Yes, they're trying to do things that may be a yard ahead of their pace at the moment. The grasp extending the reach, or the reach extending the grasp, whichever way round that is. But at least they're in the ballpark to finish off things. There are things to finish where there weren't any previously. So I think that's a massive step forward for Italy. Huge.
Yeah, it's quite something to say when you haven't won a game that actually you've galvanized the tournament.
Yeah,
because I think that thing of people going to Rome or receiving the Italians and it just being a gimme, there's no real sense of expectation, because beforehand what the result's going to be. This tournament has changed that. They were within an ace of winning at Murrayfield, and the last minute try was a two-score try, really, wasn't it? Because they could have won the game there. They still what Crowley's done is he's taken the shackles off them. They now believe that they can score against the best, that they and they have. I think that the key thing is that they've got to bring just a little bit of pragmatism into their game. They're trying to run the ball from everywhere, and very often they're actually coughing it up in and around their own 22 and conceding tries that otherwise they wouldn't. So Italy have been a real marker in this tournament. This has been a sea change, really.
Yeah, I think that's very valid. It raises the overall standard of the tournament, doesn't it, to not have any walkover games, which is exactly what the Six Nations should be. Finally, speaking of upwards trajectories, round us off with Scotland, Chris. From the sort of Finn Russell turmoil towards the back end of last year and Boozegate from, before that to a top 5 team in the world, 3rd place finish. How far have they come?
No, a long way. I mean, you have to say that their backline, crikey, that's an exciting group of players playing some exciting, inventive, imaginative rugby from all parts of the pitch. They'll have Darcy Graham to come back, who's been pretty effective, although, I don't think they missed him massively. But it'll be very interesting to see what he end up doing at fullback, because I'm not sure that Stuart Hogg's a better 15 than Blair Kinghorn at the moment. I'm really not sure that that's the case. They both have big boots and they're both quick in different ways. But I think Kinghorn brings a level of security and brings a more error-free game than Hogg does. So I think there's a decision to be made there. They've obviously got a 10 who on his day is a match winner. They're always busy. They're always busy in the back row. They're not the biggest pack. I don't think their type 5 is quite strong enough to take them to the limits of a World Cup. And they're in a very, very tough group. I mean, Ireland and South Africa in the same group. I mean, they may well not get out of their group again. And that's tough on them because, in a sense, they're better than that. But that's the draw. That's what comes of making a draw 3 years in advance. So genius from World Rugby once again. But it's I think they're a good side. I think on a given day they can be a real handful for pretty much anyone. I mean, they've nearly beaten everyone in the past, but it's nearly with a capital N, isn't it? I like them a lot. I enjoy watching them. I think they're and I have to say that I'm a big fan of the inside centre who nobody ever talks about. Although they're beginning to talk about him now, Tuipulotu, who I think has probably been. I think he's been the 12th of the tournament.
For that, Willie John, how do you feel about sharing a World Cup group with obviously not only South Africa but this Scotland side, who 3 years ago when the draw was made, they were probably, a banana skin at the very least. Now they're a genuine threat.
Yes, there's no doubt about it. Scotland are a team that really play on the edge. They play on the edge of the law all the time. And they're even from my day, they seem to be able to get away with those little offsides, those little things on the ground where they took the ball and shouldn't have taken the ball. And there were all sorts of things, but they're a team who play on the edge. They annoy the opposition all the time. And as we heard earlier, their backline is a very good backline, but their forwards, they have 1 or 2 forwards who really can retrieve the ball fast from rocks and mauls. They're a team who really should have a better record than they have. And I think Ireland going into this World Cup is on a very difficult side of the World Cup. It's going to be tough. And Scotland are there as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But I won't be surprised if Scotland do very well.
I'd love to see them get out the World Cup group. I really would, because they play such an exciting brand. Not at Ireland's expense, of course. Okay, well, yeah, and I think we can certainly say that this Six Nations has only served to advertise the World Cup later this year, which is going to be incredibly competitive, particularly one side of the draw. Okay, let's do a very quick tournament review. Sorry.
I've got to go.
You've got to get going.
I've got to leave, yeah.
That's absolutely fine. All right, well, we'll cut things there with Willie John then. Willie John, thank you so much for joining us, and huge congratulations again.
No problem.
And yeah, take care.
Well done, Willie John. They couldn't have done it without you.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
the best. All the best, Willie John.
Bye. Thank you.
Right. Well, we've just got us three then for player of the tournament, moment of the tournament, and surprise of the tournament. But that's fine. Let's start with player of the tournament first. I'm going to come to you, Nick.
Okay, well, I'm going to go with a bloke a young player who I think has been. He's part of the Grand Slam Ireland side. He scored 2 tries against England on Saturday, and that's Dan Sheehan. I think that he was absolutely integral to their win over New Zealand in the summer. And although I can't remember how many games he was out for in this, I think he was out for 1 with injury, but he is a really exceptional. He's a big hooker. He's pretty tall, but his all-round game, his precision at the line out, obviously is integral to Ireland's success there. But his carrying game and his support game is exceptional. And the way he took his try, the amount of pace he showed to take that gap was significant. And then rounding off on the outside of a sustained move, in which I think he was in, possibly he handled 3 times in that move before eventually dotting it down. I think, I think he's some player, and they're blessed with hookers as well, because Kelleher and Herring are both no slouches. But Sheehan, I think, is really exceptional, and like Van der Fleer, still young. He's younger than Van der Fleer, I think. So very good.
Chris, have you gone? I've gone one of the Ireland players as well. Mine's Caelan Doris, who faded ever so slightly, but the first 3 games he was just phenomenal. Who have you gone with?
He was something, wasn't he? And until the England game, where he was less evident, I suppose. But crikey, he had a tournament. I agree with you. I could go probably through 2 or 3 of the French side. I mean, Dupont's too obvious for words, really. I mean, some of the stuff he's doing is extraordinary. I mean, that long pass off his left hand for Penno's try. Was it Penno's try against Wales at the weekend? Is just the pass was on, and he was throwing it into a lot of space, and he had a bit of room to do it. But,
yeah, plenty of time. Yeah,
but
could have rehearsed it twice.
But I'm not sure I would have been, even at my best, and it was pretty formidable best, I can tell you. Even at my best, I don't think I would have been quite as pinpoint accurate with that. No, I mean, I admire Fickou through the tournament. I thought Flamand was something to see. I thought Penno in attack, if not always in defence, was wonderful. But I'm going to go for an Irishman as well. And we were talking with Willie John earlier about the fact that Ireland now have a type 5 that really stacks up against all comers, and they're not to be pushed around. And the guy who I think is undoubtedly the best loosehead prop in the world is Andrew Porter. I thought he was absolutely phenomenal all tournament. He's aggressive, but not in a ridiculous way, but he is aggressive. He's a big physical presence. He is very mobile. He makes next to no mistakes. And when they're setting up camp around that 5-metre area, the goal lines, when Ireland get into goal line siege territory now, they're very difficult to stop. And one of the reasons they're very difficult to stop is that bloke knows exactly what he's doing, and he does it with some real meaning. I think he's been absolutely terrific. And he's my bloke.
An Ireland clean sweep. Let's do moment of the tournament. Chris, I'll come to you again if you've got one in mind already.
I suppose my moment of the tournament came it came on Saturday. I think it was probably not because of the expertise of the execution, but although that was a very high level, but it just to me symbolised a sort of loosening of the shackles that we've so often seen Six Nations tournaments played under. Was Scotland having barely survived by the skin of their teeth, losing against Italy, which would have been a serious blow. and they're under their own sticks. And the easiest thing for them to do would just have been to end it. Just get the thing off the pitch and bank the victory. And they scored an absolutely brilliant try. And that, in terms of attitude, just a freeing of the spirit that we've seen, I think, in this Six Nations. I think it was a symbol of it. I think we all want to see more rugby played like that. You can argue that there was nothing on it, apart from the fact that if they chucked it on the floor and Italy had run back under their sticks, they'd have lost the game and there would have been a hell of a row. So there was a little bit of risk attached to it, but it was just so beautifully done. So that Scotland try at the back end of that game, when they've been absolutely on their rear ends in a big defensive set, just the sense of ambition, I found quite a warm thing, actually, and I'll remember that.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very, very good one. Nick, I've gone with, and it's not really a moment, but the opening 20 minutes or so of Ireland-France, which I think was just phenomenal. I suppose if you had to whittle it down to a moment, it would be the length of field Penno try, which just emblematized the chaos of those 20 minutes. What have you gone with?
I thought of that one, but the one that I liked, I was talking about Italy earlier on, is Capuozzo's. Unfortunately, we lost him about midway through the tournament, but was Capuozzo's try against France, and the fact that they took the French to the wire. But to see a bloke who's probably about 10.5 stone soaking wet, sort of, I wouldn't say, well, I do think he petrifies defenses now, because he's just so quick and so elusive. His movement is extraordinary, really. He makes other people look as if they're statues. And Greg Aldrit is no statue. He's a really outstanding number 8. And grew into this tournament and really sort of, you saw him get better and better as it went on. But Capuozzo made him look like a statue. His speed of footwork and just, the you talk about the encapsulation of flair, really.
It's the closest thing we've seen to Jason Robinson, really, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, well, but totally different.
Yeah, oh yeah, he doesn't have the exaggerated sidestep that Jason had, but the notion that no one knows where he's going.
Yeah, absolutely. But a bigger contrast in the sense, because Jason was incredibly powerful, and agile. This guy he's not powerful. Well, I'm sure he is. He's incredible wiry strength, but he just defies. He defies the sort of confines of the modern professional game. You'd
kick sand in his face on the beach, Nick, wouldn't you? Well, I mean, you would. Specifically,
you would
because that's the kind of bloke you are. So,
yeah, no, so for me, Capuozzo, question.
Yeah, and boy, did Italy miss him, and boy, was it a shame that he didn't get to play the last 2 games. Okay, finally, surprise of the tournament, and we'll go Chris first.
Well, I suppose I'm not talking about one specific incident here. I've got a surprise that you don't want to see and a surprise that you do. So I'll stick with the more positive one. But my negative one was just how bad, just what a pickle Wales were in. I mean, I honestly thought that they would start pretty well. I thought they could beat Ireland. I mean, famously, I said on this podcast that I tipped them to beat Ireland in the first game. This was before the strike, mind you. I mean, I made these predictions well in advance, but I did not have the foggiest idea of how poor they would be. I mean, in the autumn, yes, they lost to Georgia, but they also fronted up against far stronger sides and made fists of it. So I was astonished at the poverty of their rugby in the early rounds of this tournament. We know how many difficulties they were going under off the field, but I thought they would get a Gatland bounce. the only bounce they got was downwards. So it's like the opposite of a bounce because the upwards bit didn't happen. So it was a one-way bounce, which is a contradiction in terms. I was pretty sad. I was genuinely sad to see it because they are, they're a big part of world rugby, and the poverty of their performance I thought was desperately disappointing. I'm glad they just picked up in Paris at the weekend and did some things that they can take something from. My surprise was that the French, who have hated Twickenham since time immemorial, we know they're a good side, but it was hosing down with rain. As I understand it, I wasn't there, but it was a wet day for a French side playing the kind of rugby which is kind of handling rugby, which is an ambitious brand of rugby, to go through that game virtually error-free in the wet. Leave aside the number of points they scored. I mean, that was a bit of a freak, but it was the most extraordinary performance for a side that's no stranger to making errors, no strangers to overreaching themselves, no strangers to coming up short mentally and psychologically at Twickenham, especially, which is, as I say, not a ground that they particularly enjoy visiting. I thought it was an immense performance, and I was actually staggered by the quality of their rugby that day. Staggered.
Nick?
I was equally staggered when I saw going into this weekend's final round that the front page of L'Equipe had a huge picture which said, "Come on, England." So, given the ages-old animosity and so on, it took the biscuit.
It's the Sunak Macron bromance, isn't it? That's what it is. Everyone loves Rishi. Everyone loves Rishi.
Even
he's
you,
top
Chris.
of my hit rate. I think he's great.
But look, the great thing about it is that one or two of the Grand Slams that we've seen in recent years have not been, won by exceptional sides. They've won by sides that have squeezed their way through it. Ireland, I think, are an exceptional side this time round, and so the Grand Slam deservedly went to them. I didn't think there'd be a Grand Slam this season. I thought that the Irish would slip up at some stage, that somebody would find their number. I thought that it was going to be the French, and it wasn't to be. And they were actually not as well beaten by the scoreline, but they were well beaten in Dublin, and that's huge credit to Ireland.
I would give mine, but Chris, you've already given mine. I think the Twickenham game with France getting over their hoodoo was really quite something. I can give an off-field surprise of the tournament, and that's Nick Cain himself, who defended his title in the Predictions League last year by actually picking up the wooden spoon this year.
Really?
Confirmed.
I tell you what, I'm now extremely suspicious of your calculations. Having got me down for a what was it, an Irish victory in Murray.
No,
Nick's
Wales
go,
victory in Paris.
Nick's going to go all Trump on us and demand a recount, and there'll be huge numbers of people trying to invade your flat, Ollie.
Dead right. I definitely want to see.
But not.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal, Nick.
Yeah, Chris, you weren't here last week, but I did have Nick down for predicting an England win in Dublin, which just wasn't true. So the knives have well and truly come out for my scoring system. Nick, yeah. I'd like to congratulate you anyway. It's an accolade that, you're not going home.
Recount.
I have triple checked. I will recount again.
You will recount.
And I will publicly declare myself an idiot, as Chris declared you a few weeks ago on the podcast next week, if I am indeed wrong. Nick, you ended
There's
up with
only one idiot, and he's currently sitting in Bath.
Nick, you ended up on 71. Special guest on 74. Chris, you actually made the podium. You had a really good weekend, despite predicting Wales to beat Ireland at the start of the tournament, which I think takes the accolade for worst prediction of the entire series. Brendan maintained his spot in second, and I'm not going to say who was first because, well, you'll just get angry with me.
Just tell me, who had Italy to beat Scotland? That's what I want to know.
No one. Brendan had a 20-all draw. I promise you. I tell you what, next year, do you want to be more of a part of the scoring proceedings to understand how it works? You know, I can leave you to do all the maths and number crunching and stuff.
It's all a mystery to us.
What I will say, and I think this is to the Rugby Paper Podcast credit, so the final score of England-Ireland was 29-16. And three of us, we predicted 30-17, 29-18, and 29-17, which I think is quite a good effort. So that was a nice positive to end the tournament on. A recount has been demanded, so I will duly abide. But well, a new winner has been crowned, and a new wooden spooner has been even more aggressively crowned.
What are you buying yourself as a prize?
It's a good question, actually. I was going to ask what you're buying me as a prize.
A wooden spoon for next year.
That seems to be the cycle.
I think you'll find that as taxpayers, we're paying for your education. So crack on.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I'm certainly not doing justice with how much work I'm doing at the moment. That's another matter for another week. Gents, I'm not sure what the agenda will be next week, actually. Potentially a look at the English system and why it's failing so much. Potentially look at the National School Sevens, which is going on at the moment. But we can look forward to it regardless, and thank you for keeping me company throughout the tournament. Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Rugby Paper Podcast, and don't forget to subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use and recommend the show to your friends. The Rugby Paper is available to buy every Sunday, and to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe through our print, digital and online options at therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions. That's therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions to get all our content for as little as 14p per day.